Nancy, don't lean on this. Don't lean on this. Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters of the Houston Area's Forum on Proposition 1, also known as the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. Thank you very much to Houston Media Source Television for broadcasting this forum live this evening. For those of you at home, if you miss a little bit of this, we will put this broadcast on our website. It will be uploaded within the next few days. We're going to start off the forum. I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Nancy Sims. Nancy is a native Texan with deeply rooted relationships across the state. In fact, it is rare to go anywhere in Houston with Nancy or mention her name where someone doesn't know her. Nancy is a straight shooter and always calls it as she sees it. Nancy practices what she preaches by serving on various boards and advisory boards, including Crime Stoppers Houston, Search Homeless Coalition, and DeCamera. A recognized and trained leader, she is a graduate of American Leadership Forum, Center for Houston's Future, and Leadership Houston. And to top it all off, when she isn't at City Hall or on the Energy Road, she is an adjunct professor of political science at the University of Houston, where she teaches women in politics and trains the next generation of operatives. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Amy. All right, we are excited about this panel this evening. We have just outstanding panelists joining us to discuss this ordinance. And we have first Gilbert Herrera. I'm not going to read this whole thing.
Please don't.
Mr. Herrera founded Herrera Partners in 1992. It's a private investment banking and financial consulting firm that provides acquisition agencies advisory services. He's also a graduate of the University of Texas and on the Dean's Council for the McCombs School of Business, as well as the Executive Committee of the Chancellor's Council on for the University of Texas system. He also serves as the chairman of the Rebuild Advisory Committee here in Houston on the Rebuild Houston project, and is immediate past chairman of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Mr. O'Neill, we're honored to have you with us this evening. He's an attorney and partner with Winston Strawn. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy and served in Vietnam, graduated with highest honors in his class of 600 at the University of Texas Law School. Little UT heavy up here. And he has clerked at the United States Supreme Court. He also founded a law firm in 1981 and actually was one of the first law firms to employ a prominent politically gay lawyer named Gene Clements. Some of us remember Gene. And he's represented individual companies and countries in litigation ranging from here to China. Andy Taylor is an attorney with Andy Taylor and Associates. well known for his engagement in election law and high-profile public policy litigation. His clients have included former President George W. Bush, former Vice President Dick Cheney, Governor Rick Perry, and a vast number of elected officials and issues. Mr. Taylor also takes on many issues. And he's won many victories at both the state and federal court level and has argued in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. In the last 3 months, Mr. Taylor has received 3 unanimous Texas Supreme Court victories against the city of Houston, one of which includes Rebuild Houston. So sitting next to each other, there is a great fun. And then we have Brad Pritchett. Brad is a native Houstonian. He's a political director with Houston Unites, which is the pro-hero ordinance. And he's worked in the field of progressive politics and focus on government relations and civic engagement. He's served as the campaign coordinator for the American Civil Liberties Union and is also the current political director for Houston Unites and a community activist. Now, just to be clear, I want to make sure everybody knows the positions because, let's see. Andy Taylor is for no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So John O'Neill is opposed to Proposition 1. Mr. Herrera is speaking on behalf of the business community in support of Prop 1. Mr. Taylor is opposed to Proposition 1, and Brad Pritchett is in support. So we'll keep that in mind. And I could have let you all say that yourselves because at this point, I'm going to ask you each to provide 2 minutes to explain your position on the ordinance. And we have a timekeeper right here.
Do you want me to begin?
You may begin, Mr.
Thanks
O'Neill.
to the League of Women Voters. I need to tell you briefly my story. In 1981, I worked at a law firm. One of my law partners was a guy named Gene Clements. He was asked to leave the firm because he was gay. I left with him to start a new law firm. So I guess you can say that I bet my whole reputation, my career, at that point my family, on my belief that gay folks shouldn't be discriminated against on the basis of employment. Now, if this was a ordinance that dealt simply with that and tried to accomplish it, I would be in favor of it. But you see, an ordinance always starts with the real words of the ordinance. And the problem is, this is a terrible ordinance. It's not like any other ordinance in the United States that I've been able to find. We begin with the fact it criminalizes people. It doesn't simply say, like every other civil rights ordinance, that if I discriminate, I'm subject to a civil remedy. It says that if you discriminate, you're actually guilty of a criminal offense. Now, I remember in 2001, the district attorney here in Harris County trying to criminalize people because of private gay conduct. To do exactly the opposite doesn't build human tolerance anywhere. It's a real bad start. Also, this ordinance is extraordinarily vague for a criminal statute, really badly worded. I go down and look, there's a religious exemption. Of course, this ordinance has big problems because there are a lot of religious groups that disagree fundamentally with the purpose of it. But if you go to 17.122, it says religions are exempt. That sounds good until you read the fact that a religion is defined as someone who doesn't discriminate. In effect, the religious exemption is read out. Look, we've got in this country all kinds of peculiar people. We were founded by Quakers and by Catholics and by Baptists, but we made room for all of them. And the problem with this ordinance is it discriminates against all of them.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, and we will, you'll have a chance to continue that discussion. Mr. Herrera.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to also thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity. And I guess I'd start with, we don't have a lot of people here, so we have a small sample size, but I do this every time I speak. We're dealing with an issue of discrimination, and I'd like to ask a show of hands. Who's been discriminated against or experienced discrimination either in their family or workplace? So about half of you. Is that a fair sampling? And I guess the argument is, the people that are opposed to this are looking for perfect. And for those of us who deal in the real world, perfect doesn't exist. Over 200 cities in America have a similar ordinance. There's exceptions, there's exclusions, there's provisions that may differ. 17 states have similar ordinances. Now currently, if you're discriminated against for race or gender you go down to the EEOC and file a complaint. They're not going to adjudicate that complaint for you. You're going to have to go hire a lawyer and file a lawsuit in federal court. If you have to be transgendered or you don't have protections, there are arguments. Why do we have these protections? Well, if you don't have protections, what rights do you have? So this is a local tool. It's a Houston remedy to a substantial problem. And our view is, discrimination in any form is bad for business. It's bad for Houston. It sends a wrong signal. We talk about Houston being a welcoming, inclusive, and open city. And seldom do we have the opportunity in our lifetime to actually express that. This is our chance. You miss it, you've wasted the opportunity. You have a chance to exercise your right to vote. That's what this is about. We're going to have a debate. I'd encourage you to keep an open mind, but remember, this is about discrimination. And it's about providing a local tool. And at the end of the day, it's about economic development. Indianapolis failed to pass an ordinance in similar terms. Ultimately, the next day, they had 15,000 room nights canceled. Over time, they had 1 million room nights canceled. That translated into $1.5 billion of economic impact to Indianapolis. Arizona, the same thing. Appreciate you being here and look forward to talking with you.
And Mr. Taylor.
Thank you for having us. This bad ordinance is a plaintiff lawyer's dream, but a Houstonian's nightmare. Let me tell you why. When you actually grade the paper of the lawyers that wrote this thing, it's legally dead on arrival. I practice law and have been looking at these types of issues for almost 3 decades, and I can tell you with confidence that it doesn't meet the objective standards that are required to criminalize conduct. Think about it. When you're on the road, how do you know if you're speeding? It's because there's a speed limit sign. If your blood alcohol level is too high and you're legally driving while intoxicated, you can figure that out by measurement. It's an objective standard. If you want to criminalize conduct, you have to know in advance of the conduct what's right and what's wrong. One of the big problems with this so-called ordinance is that it applies to all public accommodations. And let me just tell you specifically what the public accommodations section says, and I quote, "Every business open to the public and offers a product, service, or facility is banned from discrimination." Well, that sounds good until you realize that it applies to a biological male, whether he sincerely believes he's essentially female or is an imposter acting like he is a female. And it allows them entry over the objection and adverse to the safety of those folks that are in the restroom. And we cannot tolerate that in our society. We already have dignity and respect by having men in men's restrooms, women in women's restrooms. And why in the world would we want to reduce the safety of our women and our children for that purpose? It makes no sense. I have 11 children, 7 of whom are daughters, and I would not feel comfortable knowing that a man could be in the restroom with them.
All right, Mr. Pritchett.
So I want to say thanks to the League of Women Voters. You will seldom see these 4 people probably sitting at the same table, so that's pretty great that we're actually all here side by side talking about this. As a native Houstonian, I've stood in parking lots and passed ice to other Houstonians after Hurricane Ike. I was one of the people who was at the Astrodome welcoming Katrina survivors here to Houston. I've always known our city to be a welcoming place that cares about everybody. Unfortunately, what we see in Houston right now is that there are cases of discrimination happening every day. And I feel like if one Houstonian is discriminated against, that's one too many. We have the case, and I think we may talk about it tonight, I'm sure it's in the news, the case at the Gas Lamp bar recently, where 3 African-American attorneys were charged to cover, while white patrons were allowed to walk in for free. And KPRC Channel 2 did a follow-up on it this past week, where Latino women weren't allowed in the VIP section, but white women were. So unfortunately, we have these cases that are happening constantly in Houston. Since May 28, 2014, when this ordinance was passed, up until September 2nd of this year, there were over 135 cases that were reported to the city of Houston. And those were people who knew enough to go to the city and ask for help. Unfortunately, they didn't have any help because there was no equal rights ordinance. 56% of those cases were racial discrimination. The next highest group of people who were discriminated against were based on gender, more than likely women being discriminated against. And after that, family status. So people wanting to take time off of work to take care of a sick loved one, even pregnancy. We don't really know the complete details on that. But this just goes to show us that we need a local tool so that we can report and resolve discrimination in Houston. It should be about worrying about people who are currently facing discrimination, who have no recourse other than hiring an attorney, filing a federal lawsuit, and waiting 3 to 5 years. Why have all that when you could go to City Hall, file it for free, and take 2 to 3 months?
Thank you. Okay, let's kick off the questions. I would ask the audience, I would like everyone to be respectful of all of our speakers. Oh, questions. Okay, that's fine. Questions, you're being handed out note cards when we get to the audience question portion. Feel free to write those. In January, we'll be collecting them. So let's just dig into it. Mr. Taylor, you started us off with talking about the bathroom issue. Let's just get it out there because it is the #1 issue on everyone's mind. So the message has been said that, there's danger to women and children due to this ordinance in public bathrooms and potentially even locker rooms. But there's no specific language about that in the ordinance. And we see that different people are interpreting it differently. So let's address that. And this should go, Brad and Andy, let's have you two address this one.
Who would you like to go first?
Why don't you go first?
Thank you. The problem is that we asked the mayor and her administration to put in specific language that would prohibit men from going into women's restrooms. That would have been such an easy fix, but she wouldn't do it. She absolutely refused, and she tweeted out to her folks, "Don't worry, I got this covered." And she has personalized this so much that I think she's lost objectivity about what we're really trying to do in protecting people when they're in that environment. Think about how strange it would be if the city government said, "You know what, we're not going to allow you any longer because people get upset if you lock your door at night when you go to bed. Or we're not going to allow you to shower with having the curtain closed. It's got to be in the open position. Or we're not going to allow you to park your car and keep your contents safe by locking that car while you're at the restaurant." People would say, that's ridiculous. We're giving up our right to be safe and to feel comfortable for what purpose? Because we're upsetting someone? And so when you think about it, when a man decides that he's essentially female and wants to go into the women's restroom, that's something that a business owner can't possibly know. So I think of my 7 girls. They're at Chuck E. Cheese. They're in the brownie troop, and they're in the bathroom, and a man decides to go in. That business owner has got an impossible decision to make. Do I protect those children and tell the man that he can't go and then risk being called a discriminator and having a criminal record because I'm going to be fined $5,000 and hailed into court? Or do I turn a blind eye and allow that man to go in there and make my patrons feel uncomfortable? The business owner should never be faced with that choice. We've had same-sex restrooms for centuries. It works just fine. When it's not broke, don't fix it.
Thank you. Brad?
So I think Mr. Herrera touched on it a little bit. Laws like the Equal Rights Ordinance exist in more than 200 cities across the country and in 17 states. If you take a step back and you really think about it for a second, if these types of bathroom incidents were happening, we'd be hearing about it constantly. Some of these laws go back decades. If you look at the coalition of organizations that are working to pass Proposition 1, you'll see organizations like the Houston Area Women's Center, the National Organization of Women, the National Association of Social Workers, organizations who spend full time worrying about safety of people, counseling survivors of assault, whose #1 priority is to make sure people are safe and that people have counseling when bad things happen to them. You have to ask yourself why those organizations would be supporting a yes vote on Proposition 1 if this ordinance actually put people in danger. It just doesn't make sense. They would be advocating against it if it actually did. And finally, I would say that this law was passed by a city council that is a majority of parents, or grandparents in some cases. This was discussed in 5 public sessions. We had multiple discussions about it. This law was written and rewritten more than once. And more than 10 times probably, the language was tweaked. Why would parents vote for a law that would put their own children and or grandchildren in danger? If you really look at it from an objective standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. This law isn't about bathrooms. This law is about discrimination. This law is about making sure Houstonians have a local tool so they can report and resolve discrimination, nothing more and nothing less. When we keep getting mixed up in bathroom talk, we're really talking about a mythical situation that's a hypothetical and that's never ever happened in any of these cities. We shouldn't be worried about hypotheticals, we should be worried about Houstonians, and Houstonians are facing discrimination every single day in the city with no tool to do anything about it, and that's why people need to vote yes on Proposition 1.
All right. Next question. Again, we touched on it a little bit in opening remarks. We know that last year Arizona faced national backlash when they considered signing a law that would have allowed business owners to deny service to LGBT customers based on religious beliefs. Of course, Indiana did sign that law and ultimately had to withdraw it. And when this happened, major corporations and sports venues, sports activities were threatened in these states. And so if Proposition 1 fails to pass in Houston, do you think we'll see a similar backlash, especially since the NCAA threatened to pull the Final Four out of Indianapolis that year, and then we have Final Four here in 2016 and the Super Bowl here in 2017? So why don't we start, this is Gilbert and John. Can we start with Gilbert since we know, and then we'll have John address it.
Yeah, I can only speak to what I think are some of the basic facts. Let me first concede that Bob McNair gave $10,000 to the anti-hero proponents. And so right off the top, I think when questioned, he was indicating that contribution was an individual contribution. He can't speak for the NFL. But I think the pattern of the NFL is, I mean, if you look at some of their domestic violence issues, some of their diversity issues, they're very conscious of their image. And I think from a brand standpoint, the NFL wants to avoid any sense that they're, coddling or encouraging any form of discrimination in whatever form. I think their official policy is discrimination is bad for business. So that said, I mean, you look at Indianapolis. The day after their ordinance passed, or that referendum passed, about 15,000 room nights canceled the next night. Over time, 1 million room nights canceled. That translates into about 1.5 billion of economic activity. So I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to have an impact. The Greater Houston Partnership, the Houston Association of Realtors, the convention, the Restaurant Association, the Convention Association, various associations have endorsed this ordinance. The Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has endorsed it. Several other organizations have endorsed it. I think in the belief that, again, discrimination in any form is bad. Now, the arguments are going to be a little discrimination is okay. Right, that's really what they're saying. Or let's get a perfect ordinance, and in lieu of that, let's we'll let things continue. I just think that we have to be conscious of that, and also be aware of this notion that they're conflating two separate lived experiences, which I think is a really dangerous premise. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Huge chunks of the Houston business community are opposed to this ordinance. And it's not because they're in favor of discrimination or they would be opposed to a neutral ordinance. I'm telling you, this ordinance is crazy. There is not a single city in the United States with an ordinance like this, nor a state. There are form ordinances. When I first was asked to look at it, I figured, well, this is just the San Antonio ordinance or the Dallas ordinance. It'd be a great thing for Houston. I'd be in favor of it. Then I looked at the San Antonio ordinance and the Dallas ordinance, and they're nothing like this at all. They're not criminal ordinances. They don't criminalize people. They don't contain phony exemptions for religion that then say, if your religion, unless you don't let protected categories in. This thing is so badly drafted, it will make Houston a laughingstock if it actually is enforced. Now, it's vague. It doesn't follow a pattern. What we need to do is go back to the drawing boards and get a genuine gay rights ordinance that's like San Antonio, like Houston, like Austin. This is a home-cooked deal that is an orphan. It has absolutely, look, I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I clerked on the Supreme Court. I read this ordinance. I don't understand big chunks of this ordinance. And we're supposed to expect small business people to be able to read and understand this. There are other terrible problems. It sets up an office of an inspector general in a city that has bad roads, has water failing, and is going broke. and it sets it up. The inspector general goes out, and his job is to go and check all of us and check small business all over the city. It doesn't make any sense. What we need is a sensibly drawn ordinance that follows the national pattern, that doesn't do things like go directly after religious organizations. Understand, we've got religious organizations that run housing for their parishioners. That's a crime under this ordinance. If you're a
John.
Baptist organization and you set up a deal for poor people and they're Baptist, you've committed a crime. That's what we're talking about.
Thank you. All right. Well, this has been mentioned as well, but we can go ahead and talk about it a little bit more in depth. You brought up the gas lamp example and the bar that excluded or charged more money. And it's been happening all around Midtown and Washington Avenue for a few years now. And there have been a number of incidents reported, and it even moved one of the council members because he was actually opposed to Hero, and then he had a similar experience, not allowed in, and it caused him to shift his position on the ordinance. And so I think the question we'd like to discuss is, how would you, we'll use the gas lamp example, how would you have had these three gentlemen who had this experience, and of course we don't know the details of their case, so I'm not asking you to give them legal advice, but how would they have handled this situation without the ordinance that the city has voted into place? And Andy or Brad?
Sure.
Just take
Well,
off.
I'll take a shot at that. First of all, we already have in place federal and state laws that cover the fact pattern that you're asking about. And so if in fact somebody's rights were violated, we already have a system to take care of it. And it's a very well organized and well functioning system. The thing that's the problem here is literally by injecting the public accommodations section, we call it the bathroom ordinance. Because you've got that, it's like a cancer that has been injected in the body of this so-called equal rights amendment or ordinance. You know, I don't know if folks are very familiar with the polling, but if this is about equal rights, why is it that 80% of African Americans are against this? Why is it that 70% of Hispanics who have been polled are against this? Why is it that 55,100 people signed a petition to put this on the ballot because they were against it? Why is it that the Houston Area Pastors Council, one of my clients, which is a loose affiliation of over 400 churches nationwide, are against this? When you look at the record of what happened here, all we wanted is for a chance to have a vote. We were stiff-armed. I had to file a lawsuit against a city that I love and force them to do what the Constitution already requires. I also want to mention this business about a business problem. We got the Super Bowl and the Final Four before Hero was ever first enacted. That's not why we got those. We already have contracts in place. Do you think Bob McNair, the owner of the Houston Texans, would want to do anything to jeopardize the Super Bowl? Come on, let's be real.
Brad?
So, talking about the gas lamp, the three gentlemen who were actually were charged cover are all attorneys, which they know full well exactly what it takes to file a federal lawsuit, and they know how expensive it can be and how time-consuming it can be. The problem with what happened at Gaslamp was that they didn't have anywhere to go locally to report that discrimination or have any type of resolution at a local municipal level because there was no equal rights ordinance. Now, if we have an equal rights ordinance, and we will hopefully have one on November the 4th, people could go to City Hall, they could file a form, and then the Office of the Inspector General, which is an already existing part of the City of Houston, no new government was created by creating the Equal Rights Ordinance, will investigate that. During the 2 months when the ordinance was actually in effect for the City of Houston, there were 11 cases filed under the Equal Rights Ordinance. Out of those 11, the city was able to dismiss 5 of those cases because they investigated and found that no actual discrimination had taken place. More than likely, it was businesses with a no shirt, no shoes, no service policy or something like that that's applied equally to everybody, no matter who they are. The idea that discrimination isn't happening in the city is obviously not true. We know it's happening. We deserve to have a local resource so that people can do something about it without having to go out and file a federal lawsuit. The reality is that more often than not, people who are the victims of discrimination are the people who have the least access to the resources to do something about it. Absolutely, we have state and federal protections for race. Only if you can really have access to pay a high-priced attorney and you can take time off of work to deal with court. And most people who are victims of discrimination don't have that luxury. What they need is something that's free, which the Equal Rights Ordinance would be, and that's local. They could take a bus down to City Hall and they can go inside and file the complaint and then let the city be their advocate. I mean, we talk a lot about, government intrusion and different things. This is what government is designed to do. It's designed to protect people.
Okay, I promise I'll make this up. I promise I'll make the time up. But I have to follow up. Because, Brad, I challenge you, did not the court of public opinion dramatically affect this business? From what I've heard, yes. But, because the court of public opinion very quickly turned on this business just from the gentleman telling their story. And then, Andy, for you, a follow-up on I still didn't catch from you what they would have done without the ordinance. I know there's state and federal law, but what does it take? And just 30 seconds, because we're on this tight time thing. I'm going to take it off your closing statements.
Well, I think the point that I was trying to make is that the laws already on the books, both federal and state, would enable those litigants to file a complaint. And they don't have to always go to court. They could do EEOC if it's an employment situation. There are other situations that would allow them to go through a process that doesn't require filing a legal challenge. Okay. You make a very good point, and that is there's another court, and that's the court of public opinion. And when you draw public opinion and focus on somebody's bad behavior, it does have an effect on them, and it's deterrent. So,
thank you.
Well, I'll say absolutely the court of public opinion kind of moved and consolidated around what happened at Gaslamp. The guys at the Gaslamp, who I know, all three, none of them really knew what Proposition was until they were discriminated against, and now they're all really big advocates of Proposition 1. The thing about, they were really great. They got media involved. They made a lot of noise. There were a lot of stories about it. You would have thought that would have been enough. Gaslamp got really embarrassed about what happened, and they tried to do damage control really unsuccessfully. And then KPRC did an expose 2 nights ago where they were still discriminating against people based on race. So they really didn't learn their lesson that time around.
All right, I'm sorry. I just had to do a little follow-up. Didn't you all appreciate that? Okay, good. All right, so, and I think Gilbert and John, you both touched on this a little bit. Houston is an incredibly diverse city, and we're recognized nationally and internationally for our food scene, which represents the people that live here, for our openness, for our diversity. And so the question kind of becomes, and frankly, we've already seen a significant amount of national press about Houston and even international press on the mere fact that we're arguing about this ordinance and having a public vote, which I fully support 100% to vote on it. But we are getting a lot of national coverage today. If Prop 1 fails or if it passes, what will the headlines be on November 4th in the national and international media scene? And yeah, Johnny,
Sure.
you start, and then Gilbert.
To speak to the remedy somebody would have, if somebody's discriminated against, come to our law firm. We have all kinds of people that do it pro bono. They do it for free. And if it's a good case, we'll get rich on a contingent fee representing you. That all exists, and it's a much more powerful system than Inspector Clouseau of the city of Houston wandering around trying to charge someone with a felony. Now, what would actually happen? Let's assume it passes. The press on this ordinance, look, if it were a plain vanilla gay rights ordinance, well, of course, there wouldn't be any opposition, I don't think, to it. Can you imagine what happens to the city of Houston if a church gets prosecuted for the housing that it's maintaining for its parishioners? We're a laughingstock, okay? People that analyze this ordinance think it's absolutely ridiculous. Can you imagine what the coverage that men and women can use exactly the same and have to use exactly the same restroom? Can you imagine how silly that makes us look? And the reason for it is that there's not another ordinance like this in the United States. The way to start was to start with the form ordinance that everybody else has. Austin, it's good enough for Austin. It's good enough for San Antonio. It's good enough for Dallas. It's good enough for El Paso. And pass that. This wasn't an answer to it. This is a ridiculous throw together. It's a political deal by people who were not around in 1981 when my partner Gene Clements fought for gay rights. It was a political mishmash put together. It makes this look ridiculous. We should defeat it and then substitute a sensible ordinance.
Gilbert.
Well, I've talked about it. I think failure to pass this ordinance is going to have a very detrimental effect on Houston, both from a brand standpoint, a perception standpoint, economic development standpoint, tourism. That's why the Restaurant Association, that's why the convention folks, that's why the Great Houston Partnership have all come out strongly in support of this ordinance. I think the other thing is, part of the inflammatory language is, a felony criminalizes behavior. I mean, I think those are all sort of hyperbolic statements intended to sort of inflame and scare people, just like this conflating of two lived experiences, this notion that transgendered happen to be predators. There's just no evidence of that. There's no research of that. If this is really a public safety issue, I mean, in the last year, we've had over 400 people shot in mass killings, and that is basically because we have mental illness. Now, the opponents argue that transgendered is deviant behavior, right? Now, I'm not a medical professional, but deviant behavior sounds like some kind of, mental problem, right? Those aren't choices. Those people have a life to live. And I think we as a society, if they don't protect all of us, who do they protect? And again, it's this notion that a little bit of discrimination is okay. Just ask yourself, is that really true? Is that what we're about? Is that our core value? I would argue not. And I would simply say, don't let perfect get in the way of good. This is a good ordinance. It's an effective ordinance. We can modify it and change it. There's no statutory provision about amending it later. That's what you do as a city. The other thing I would argue about, or make you aware of, these very same people that oppose this are also talking about government overreach from the federal government, right? The state of Texas has sued the federal government 19 plus times. And so now your only remedy is to go to the federal government. What about local option? What about local involvement? So I would just leave you with those thoughts as, be thoughtful about this and be reflective in terms of what the arguments being made for and against this are.
I have to say this. Is it a diverse city that goes and prosecutes the church because it disagrees with how they run their housing project? Is it a diverse city that goes on to a black church that's providing housing for people that can't really afford it, but limits it to its parishioners and then gets prosecuted by Inspector Clouseau? And as far as whether this is a criminal statute, it is read the statute. The problem I have, it all sounds so crazy, but that's because the statute is that crazy. Words are a difficult thing. And that's why it was such a terrible mistake to do it this way, to put it together. There are many business organizations that oppose this, a large majority.
I get 30 seconds. This whole question about situational morality, okay? This ordinance has been called godless by people who of faith. I would simply remind you of the fact that, it's one thing to practice your religion without the fear of being infringed upon or discriminated against. The fact that you're granting rights and protecting rights of those who are amongst us doesn't infringe upon your religious rights, your religious liberties, and it certainly is no argument for this. Again, I object to the notion that we have this situational morality. We protect those, we don't protect others. We find solace in some, not in others. Just keep that in the back of your mind.
Okay, thank you guys. All right, let's see. I think we've kind of touched on this one, but I'll give, certainly John O'Neill has given us a great legal interpretation. And I know, Andy, that you've prosecuted on this ordinance, or no, you've taken it to trial, primarily to get the vote and then to change the wording on the ballot, correct?
Right.
So I think this is a good question for you and Brad to address. Why don't we let Brad go first this time? Opponents of the ordinance argue that it is poorly written, and it could be strengthened through rewording. If given the opportunity, would you rewrite the ordinance? And if you did, what would you include or remove?
So I am not an attorney, so I'm not giving free legal advice to anybody. I would not rewrite the ordinance. I know some people have very strong opinions about the ordinance. One of the things that I think would be great would be if the enforcement mechanism were stronger. I would love to see a Human Relations Commission, which is what a lot of other cities do, in order to enforce non-discrimination laws like this. New Orleans has one that's been around for a really long time. But I think it's important to understand that when When opponents are talking about wanting to reword this ordinance, what they really mean is they want to exclude people from being protected by this ordinance. You're allowed to have your opinions. Non-discrimination laws are not about beliefs, they are about actions. When your actions in the public sphere discriminate against anybody for any reason, then you are discriminating against someone, and that person should be protected from discrimination. Opponents want to reword it because they want to exclude protections for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. I think that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Houstonians are still Houstonians. I also think they're still human beings who deserve dignity and respect and deserve to be treated the same as everybody else. So no, I would not reword the ordinance. I think it's good as is. And I think that over time, as Gilbert said, we are a city that can amend ordinances at any time. This is not written in stone. It can be changed to include people, to be stronger, and to work more effectively.
Nancy, first of all, let me talk about an area we haven't touched on and explain why the lack of clarity is a huge problem for Houstonians, and that's in the area of employment discrimination. If you look at the ordinance, it prohibits two things. It prohibits preferences, and it prohibits antipathy. I'll go into that in a second. A preference, for example, might be a situation where a real hero, somebody who has done 3 tours of duty in Iraq or Afghanistan, has had a serious injury, is disabled, comes back to the United States and wants to be able to help his family by earning an income, you're not allowed to give that military person a preference in hiring. Under this statute, it criminalizes that conduct. That is crazy. The other one, antipathy. Antipathy is not defined in the ordinance. So if you go look at the definition of antipathy, it says having a negative feeling towards someone. How in the world can you know in advance if you're having antipathy to somebody? Is that a raised eyebrow? Is that a furrowing of the brow? Is it a snicker? Is it a looking away and not addressing that individual? I mean, what is it? And so if you're going to have a real law that isn't created by a legal B team, but actually could hold up in court, you would be very clear about what kind of employment practices are illegal and discriminatory. This thing is dead on arrival.
And would you help the city draft a new one?
I'd be happy to help the city. I told the city from the very get-go, the reason why you're going to have so much opposition is because you've written a law that allows a man in a woman's restroom. I'm not talking about people
Okay.
that are transgender. I'm talking about people who want to take advantage of that law to
Okay,
go
thank
in and
you,
do
Ian.
bad things.
I want 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I've
I'll
actually...
get 15 seconds. My
Okay,
15
do
seconds
15,
are,
but I'm
number
actually
one,
going to
the
toss
ordinance-
something out to you all.
No, load of it.
The ordinance
Okay.
was specifically written by the City of Houston not to affect MWBE programs, which is Minority and Women Business Entrepreneurship Programs, which include veteran preference programs. Vote Vet's an organization designed to protect veterans' interests as endorsed Proposition 1. As the spouse of a veteran who was discriminated against because of his veteran status and denied a job, it is absolutely not true that this ordinance affects veteran
Thank
hire
you.
policies.
Okay, but I had to toss something out to all four of you, just 30 seconds, okay? Because we always talk about men and women's restrooms, but we never talk about women and men's restrooms, which I believe is much more socially acceptable if you've ever been to a live sporting event in Houston, Texas, or a concert.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe like the Taylor Swift concert, right? I mean, you know, there are hardly any men there, and the lines for the bathroom are just gazillion miles long. So I'm just curious if anybody wants to touch on that, because everything we've heard is no men in women's bathroom because women need protection.
The reverse is true as well.
But how many times have women used, I bet your own daughters and wife may have done that if they've been to a basketball game, because it's the worst. Toyota Center has not nearly enough women's rooms.
I can actually tell you that they haven't.
Really?
But I can only imagine a situation where a business owner is faced with a decision: what am I going to allow and what am I not going to allow? The problem is that you can't know if somebody is sincerely transgender. They don't have a sign that says I'm transgender. So if somebody is an imposter and has bad intentions, they've got a right to go in there. It's no answer to the young girl who has been molested to say, we've got criminal laws, we can indict that person and prosecute. That doesn't protect them. We need to protect on the front end, not after the harm has been perpetrated.
Okay.
I
Let's let somebody else
want to
comment.
respond to this. So first of all, predators need to be caught, captured, and prosecuted. There are laws in the books. 2, this is all based on a false premise. 2, there are transgendered amongst us. There's a sign that calls restroom. Walk over there and tell me if that's a locked door. We have these people in our society. They deserve protection. This is not about, people being transgender, being predatory. It's simply about discrimination. That's what it's about. I mean, how many restrooms do you walk into in any public space where they're locked? If we were that concerned about public safety, we would have locks on these doors. We don't. It's just a simple truth.
Okay, John wants to throw in a thought here, and I'm going to let him because he's been
Only-
very respectful.
Thank you. Only quick. Imagine that you own a small business. You own a bar or you own a restaurant, and a guy walks into the women's bathroom. All right, now you don't know what this is, but if you try and stop him and you're wrong, you've committed a crime. You've committed a misdemeanor. You can be fined up to $5,000 for doing that. That's why this law is crazy, absolutely stark raving crazy and badly written.
Is there a woman in here that hasn't used a men's room at some point? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to see, because, when you're standing there and there's no line in the men's room and there's long lines in the women's room and you just need, the restroom. So just had to throw that out, because there is the opposite side of men and women's restrooms. There's women and men's restrooms. Okay, had to get that in there. And also, the bulk of the audience questions are about bathrooms. So I'm actually going to call out a couple that are not about bathrooms, because I think they're good questions to address. And, some I think are good for us to talk about. People ask about private buildings, like private office buildings. And I know actually a number of offices in private office buildings that are unisex, right? They may have 1 or 2 bathrooms per floor or something, and they're unisex. They're just, anybody uses that bathroom.
Most airports have unisex.
A lot of airports do. And
They're called family
theaters-
restrooms, but they're unisex restrooms.
Yeah, and movie theaters, Memorial Mall has that now. And so how does this affect that? Does it allow it to go forward? Does it not allow it to go forward, or how does it work?
To me, right now, you can do what you want. If you want to have a unisex bathroom, you can have it. If you don't want to have it, if it's a situation where it seems to be uncomfortable, you don't have to have it. Under this statute, I'm telling you, you don't know what the story is. You don't know whether you can have it or not have it. You don't know who's going in. You can't regulate it. It's just crazy. It's not the way anybody would write a statute. There are real people in the real world that runs little businesses, and they almost all have bathrooms. They've got to operate under this deal, and if Inspector Clouseau comes up, they get fined $5,000. They're guilty of a crime if they do it the wrong way. That's not Houston. That's not the big, diverse town that I grew up in, the free city of Houston. That's just crazy.
Who's in the best position to know how to keep safety and security on their premises? It's going to be the owner and the manager and the employees that work there, not the government. We don't need more government. Last time I checked, we were uniformly against government being involved in what you can do in the bedroom. So why now are we going to allow them to be involved in what we do in the bathroom? It makes absolutely no sense. The situation about unisex restrooms, that's because we trust the owners to make those decisions. The unisex restrooms typically are very small and might only allow 1 person at a time. But we're talking about opening the doors up to restrooms that could have 100 people in there at times. I would not be comfortable having my children be in that situation where a man is there. And we are talking about restrooms. Don't forget, this also applies to showers. It also applies to changing facilities.
I got to get you to wrap it up.
I'm going to add, the City of Houston has building codes for certain businesses and permitting codes. Nothing in this ordinance actually requires people to build new restrooms. And I absolutely agree when he talks about the fact that most family restrooms are single use. It's for a mother and a child or a father and a child if you need a changing station. There's nothing in this ordinance that says suddenly everybody's going to be pushed into one ginormous bathroom or shower. That's just not a reality. What this ordinance is, at its core, is a non-discrimination ordinance that is designed to give everyone in this room a local remedy to report and resolve discrimination. We spent so much time talking about bathrooms that the actual point of this ordinance gets mixed up. And that's exactly what opposition to this ordinance wants to happen. They want us spending 20 minutes talking about bathrooms. We shouldn't be talking about bathrooms. We should be talking about who in Houston needs to be protected from discrimination and who right now have no tools other than federal lawsuits and hiring attorneys.
Okay,
And-
thank you.
Well, they both talk, so
Okay.
I would simply add that as Pope Francis admonished us in his comments before Congress and in the White House, he was talking about refugees and immigrants. These are not statistics. These are people. These are God's children. I think we have an obligation to protect those amongst us who deserve to be protected and to make sure that those folks who need protection have those protections and are afforded the rights that we all enjoy. It's just simply that this is about providing the rights to non-discrimination that all of us enjoy and should be entitled to. That's a core value. That's what Houston represents.
Okay, I think this is a really good question. The gender identity is emerging as an issue, and a lot of times issues lead laws. They're happening before there are laws to address the topic. And so I guess the question that the audience person shared with us is the goals of the ordinance are admirable, but it seems as the vague language is an invitation for a lawsuit. And would it not be better for legislative and judiciary to address the issue of gender identity? So I'm going to let all of y'all, but just 30 seconds, okay, because I'm getting, noticed over here for.
Well, I think we're unanimous in this. Don't we want clarity in the law? I mean, don't we want to know in advance of our conduct what's allowed and what's not allowed? I mean, that's only fair. And the thought here of saying, well, we've got to protect these folks, this isn't about civil rights. It's not about equal rights. It's about according special rights to a very limited group to the detriment of the security and safety of everyone else. If we said, I'm going to use a provocative example, if we said that Islamic terrorists are
Okay.
offended when they go through airport security,
Okay,
we're not
thank
going to have
you.
security
Thank you,
anymore?
Andy.
Makes no sense.
Who wants to go next? Let's jump in.
I could go next if you want me to. Gender identity to me is the smaller issue. The big issue is the assault directly on churches. You have the Catholic Church running whole health systems. They can no longer prefer Catholics in their health systems or in the housing they run. It's a crime, as a matter of fact, under this ordinance. Same thing with the Presbyterians. Same thing with the Black Baptist churches throughout town. Why? Why on earth would this happen in Houston? As I say, what we need is you see, the problem is we're stuck with this. Mayor, our mayor's
you.
pretty good, but if we get a bad mayor,
Thank
you
you,
don't
John.
know what will happen. It's the law.
Thank you, John.
I understand people not necessarily understanding what it means to be transgender. A lot of us don't have a mental template for what that means. Never met a transgender person that you know of, maybe. But just to put it in perspective, no matter if a person's transgender or not, they're still a Houstonian who is entitled to be protected. 1 out of 15 transgender people will be murdered because they're transgender. 40% of transgender people report being verbally harassed for using a public bathroom. 10% report being physically assaulted for it. When we're using this bathroom myth and we're saying transgender people are predators, they are not the predators, they are the prey. No one is more concerned about bathroom
Thank you,
safety
Brad.
than members of the transgender community.
I would just ask the viewing audience and the audience here to keep in mind this is about discrimination. A simple fact. All the inflammatory language, all the hyperbolic statements don't distract from the fact that this is about according people the right to exist, work, receive services without the fear of discrimination.
Okay, I think I've tried to be really balanced, huh? Okay, 3 minutes. So we got just real quick, one more. So this question is straight from the audience, promise. But considering you are all men, how do you understand the experience of marginalized and vulnerable populations who might require protection under HERO?
I think that's a fair question. I've devoted my entire career to standing up for the little guy. That's what I do. I represented the people in this very case against a mayor who said, no, this is about my rights. I'm not going to let the people vote. She disenfranchised 1 million people. That's what I do for a living. You know, we live in a city that doesn't discriminate. Look at our city council's makeup. We have African Americans, Hispanics. We have a gay mayor.
Okay, let's keep them brief.
We have proof positive that we don't discriminate.
I think that
Brad?
there are people in this room who can absolutely say you've been discriminated against. The idea that we don't discriminate in Houston is not a factual statement. I think that when we're really looking at who we are on the stage, most of us on the stage are white men of privilege. I have never faced real discrimination in my life. I may have been called bad words here and there, but I've never been denied a job or entry into a business. But I have a lot of friends who have. I sat through 5 public sessions at City Council hearing stories of Houstonians who've experienced discrimination.
Okay.
Working on this campaign, we've had tons of people step forward saying, I've experienced this discrimination, it's happening in Houston, and it's real. Because it's not happening to us doesn't mean it's not
Go
happening.
ahead, John. Get started.
I guess that's why I'm so desperately opposed to this. My law partner, Gene Clements, experienced discrimination. We watched gays being criminally prosecuted. What a horrible thing. The solution is a criminal statute to criminalize the people that disagree with them, to criminalize the religions that disagree with them. This is Houston. That's diverse. Listen, my law partner, buried over in Washington Cemetery, would turn over in his grave at this statute, and passed by a bunch of people who could not be found during the real period when people were fighting for rights.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just simply say I grew up in South Texas. I'm 59 years old. In the 50s, there was plenty of signs where I grew up. I remember no dogs, no Mexicans. It's a real world. I would also remind you that the recent vote of the Supreme Court to allow marriage equality was based on a 1983 decision by a judge who said if God intended us to mix it up, we'd have been born that way. It's a biracial couple seeking to get a marriage license. Now it's gay couples. So our history is fraught with discrimination. This is nothing other than a local tool, local remedy, and I just ask the viewing audience and people here to keep that in the back of your mind. Thank you.
Well, I kind of cut into your closing statements, but the TV is about to wrap up. If the audience members want to stay and visit with any of our panelists, you're welcome to do so. And I want to encourage everyone to vote. The most important thing of all, no matter your opinion, is to cast your ballot. It's a democracy, and that's what we're here to see happen. So you can vote between now and October 30th in early vote.
November.
Well, and the election itself is on November 3rd. So, but we have early voting between now and October 30th. So, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We have voters' guides. If you have not made up your mind, there are voters' guides. And I wanted to recognize mayoral candidate Stephen Costello, who joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great job, man.
Yeah, great job. That's fun. You're a good debater.
I'm glad you were covering well.
Off the closing statements.
Oh, no, it's fine.
I thought it was too much fun.
No, I thought you did a great job of giving everybody a chance to speak.
Oh, thank you.
Brad.
It's there's so much in that to cover. It's difficult. Thank you. Good to see you, John. How are you? Nice to meet you. Awfully nice to meet you.
I caught on with the last half. My wife said she was coming down for it. And it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And I said, I was up in Kingwood. I said, I'm going to come down.
We got our sign up.
Take care, Andy. Great job. You're with us. I'm a Houstonian. Oh, thank you.
Because, we all do it.
Advil. Hi. What's your name?
Dr. Gail.
Hi.
Where can I get a copy of the
Yeah. If you will either write down